The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Depending on where you're logging in from today, one of those will sound just about right. Welcome back to another great episode of our Best Practices webinar series with 7SIGNAL. A lot of you have logged in early, as always. Thank you for doing that. If you'd like to, let us know where you're logging in from. If you are working remotely from home, if you're in the office today and are fortunate to be doing that, if you are, what part of the world you're logging in from, we'd love to know, and we love hearing from you all. I am back in my apartment in downtown Cleveland, and I am joined today by Dave Hallis in Kent, Ohio. How are you today, Dave?
Great. It is always beautiful here in Kent, Ohio.
Lovely Kent, Ohio. We got some spring weather here in Cleveland, a lot different than last week where we had some snow, so I'm happy about that. Let's see who's dropping in here. We got Germund, as always, joining us from northern Norway where it is snowing. Sorry, Germund, but thanks for joining us today. We have Pekka joining us from Finland. Thank you for joining us. We have Ron joining us from the office in St. Louis. Thank you, Ron, for being back here. Let's see who else we have here. We have Forotan joining us from Montreal. Thank you for joining us today. And I see several of you dropping in here again. We'll go ahead and get started and circle back with you later as we move forward. So we are 7SIGNAL, the leader in wireless experience monitoring. And as always, before we dive into today's topic, we will give a little background on our history at 7SIGNAL and how we are the leader in wireless experience monitoring. So a very interesting topic here today, Introduction to Link Layer Discovery Protocol. And as I mentioned, we are joined by Dave Hallis here, one of our solutions engineers here at 7SIGNAL. And I'm Kelsey Rizzuto, the marketing specialist here at 7SIGNAL. Really excited to dig deeper here into this technical topic. And if you have any questions or comments throughout Dave's presentation, feel free to drop them in the questions panel, and we will cover that during the Q&A portion at the end of the broadcast. So a few announcements here. As always, we partner with CWNP for every single one of our webinars. So by attending these weekly Wednesday webinars, you are eligible for continued education credits. So if you're pursuing a certification and would like one of these certificates, go ahead and drop us a note, and we can easily send over a PDF to you via email. We also send out a newsletter every other Wednesday morning, the Digital Experience newsletter from 7SIGNAL. So if you are not currently receiving that newsletter and would like to, I will drop the link here in the chat for you to join our mailing list and receive those bi-weekly articles, best practices, tips, and more, in addition to survey questions. We additionally host a product tour every single Friday at 12 noon Eastern, and you can go ahead and register at that link there, go.7signal.com/tour, and this link will also be provided to you in the chat panel, so go keep your eye out for that if you'd like to join us this week. We also post our recording and our slides for every single broadcast to our Twitter account. Those will be up there later this afternoon, so if you're on Twitter, go ahead and give us a follow at 7SIGNAL. But if you're not, all of you will still be receiving a follow-up email with access to the slides and today's recording as well. And finally, we also post the recordings to our YouTube channel. So today's will be up there, but you can go ahead and watch all of our previous topics and archived webinars that we've done in the past and rewatch some of your favorite topics. Okay, a little history on 7SIGNAL. We were established in 2007 in Helsinki, Finland, and we're now located in Cleveland, Ohio. We've hit a lot of major milestones in our history that we're incredibly proud of, such as the 1 billion data points that we're analyzing daily, in addition to the 5 million devices that we're monitoring daily as well. And with that, we also have 15 patents, which goes to show that the technology you see from us at 7SIGNAL, you're only going to see from us at 7SIGNAL. Now, to give you a little background as to what makes us so different, if you look at your typical enterprise LAN infrastructure here on the right, you've already got great tools, great technologies giving you really useful feedback and perspective into the network infrastructure, such as your Riverbed, Cisco, Aruba, AppNeta, and many more. but we pick up where they leave off, moving into a different space, giving you that visibility into the individual user's experience. And we'll start here first with Mobileye. Mobileye can ultimately be installed on any mobile device, your phones, your tablets, pickers and scanners, your laptop, and more. And it gives you that perspective and visibility into the individual user experience as well from the outside in. Additionally, we can get that perspective into those external home networks. A lot of us here, like Dave and myself, are working from home today, either full-time or doing a flex schedule from being remote to in the office. And with that, it's still incredibly critical to stay connected to your work, regardless of where you're logging in from. So with Mobileye, we can give you that visibility into the user experience from home as well, which is incredibly relevant today and moving forward. We additionally have Sapphire Eye, which are our sensors for service level quality and RF visibility. And through this combination of Mobileye and Sapphire Eye, you're really gaining a full holistic perspective as to what's occurring in your network environment and your user experience that you just can't find anywhere else. All right, thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and move forward here with our trivia question for the day that Dave provided to us. So let's see how you do. All right, Dave, can you see this question up here?
I can.
All right. LLDP is defined in IEEE 802.11ax, IEEE 802.1ab, or IEEE 802.11ab. A lot of mixed responses here I see filtering in. Give you a few more seconds here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. How did we do today, Dave?
Oh, no. Oh, no. It's sort of like a little bit of a trick question because when people think of Wi-Fi, and obviously when people think of Wi-Fi, they think of 7SIGNAL. And when people think of Wi-Fi, they think of 802.11. So I threw this a little bit of a trick question in here. This is not an 802.11 standard. This is an actual 802.1 standard is where this comes from. So it's that middle one, that 802.1ab is where it's defined in.
Awesome. Well, we got a few of you who answered correctly. Thanks for doing that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass our controls over here to Dave so we can dive into LLDP.
Sounds great. Let me pick the right screen, hopefully. Now, hopefully you can see a whole bunch of pretty notes about me. It's all about me. So some of the things about myself. I'm a solutions engineer here at 7SIGNAL, CWNA certified. I've got a lot of experience in wireless. I was also known past life as at Cisco as a Cisco innovator. I was involved with 802.11, the standards committee. So for instance, I was the chair of 802.11i for enhanced security. I was the initial task group chair for 802.11ah for sub 1 gigahertz operation. It's also known from within the Wi-Fi Alliance as Halo. And then I was involved in the formation of the Wi-Fi Alliance. It used to be known as WECA. And I've got a number of patents. So that's enough about me. And so here's where we start talking about LLDP, Link Layer Discovery Protocol. So the thing to know there, this is a discovery protocol that operates over that link. So if you've got like an Ethernet wire and you're plugging it in one side and you're plugging it in the other one, that's basically the limitations of where it goes. It goes from one device to the next one. So here we're kind of saying the distribution switch to the access switch. So here's a picture that you might find familiar. And so the one question that I was kind of leading to is like, you mean you need a discovery protocol to figure out where that I plug that wire into? And so this might look familiar to you. And the reason why is, have you looked at your wiring closet lately, that you might end up seeing something like this? And then the key thing is that it's not so much just that when you just plug it in, when you plug it in, you might have an idea of where it's at. But a little bit later on, that over time, you're kind of trying to figure out where are things plugged in. Obviously, If you're just in a lab, it's kind of easy to figure things out. But if you've got a building and you're trying to figure out, you plug something into the wall, well, then where does it go from here? And it can be a lot more difficult to figure out where things go. So you might say to yourself, well, Dave, that would never happen to me. I would never have something that looked like that rat's nest. You might have something that looks like this. This is obviously not something that I've ever wired up. And you can say, well, I can kind of clean things up. That'll help, right? And so then, it's like you can imagine yourself talking to somebody over the phone and say, it's the blue wire. It's obvious. Just look. That's where it's plugged in. And I actually, as you can see, I wear reading glasses, so that it becomes very difficult for me to figure that out. Even if you kind of like knew where things were at, there's still stuff that you have difficulty on. And I'm sure that a lot of you are already somewhat familiar with LLDP, and there's other protocols as well that are proprietary that kind of do the same thing. And why are they useful? Well, for instance, you might, if you want to do some configuration, well, if you wanted to get to that device, well, how do you get to it? Because, where exactly is it? For instance, I kind of like said, well, you configure via IP, but how do you know what the IP address is? LLDP. So, well, why is it that there's some things that you might want to discover just as you're plugging in? Well, a good example is power over Ethernet. Here, that you take a device and you might plug it into your switch, and this is becoming more common that you kind of have the device say, well, this is how much power I want. Here, I'm actually being a little silly here, so the switch is saying, hey, power thing has gone to your head, I'm not going to give you all that power. But there are certain devices that will kind of do things like this. For instance, if you got a large switch and you got a number of devices, that switch might not only be able to power up a certain number of devices. So there's a certain budget that it's going to have. And so therefore, the different devices might be able to kind of say, well, I could kind of run in some lower power mode if I cannot run with full power. For instance, if it's an access point, there's certain things that the access point could do. For instance, it might turn off one of its radios, or it might lower the transmit power. So there's a number of things that the device might do to say, okay, I'll come up and I'll do something, initially not draw a lot of power. And then as the device that, for instance, the switch was kind of providing power, to say, hey, this is how much that you're allowed to actually use. And then the device kind of come up accordingly. VLANs. I'm sure that a lot of people are kind of familiar with VLANs and trying to keep track of, well, what number of VLAN do you have going to manage what type of activity? And so this LLDP can help out here as well by doing it, for instance, if nothing else, you can make it so that you can kind of see that this is what VLAN a certain port is allowing through. So therefore, you might make it easier to see if there's a configuration issue that you have to kind of go through and say, oh, I misconfigured this one switch, this port, and I'll go through and update that so that the traffic kind of flow through. And then also you can try to make it so that things from a system-wide, some vendors will make it so that, that you could kind of go off and say, have the, for instance, this phone, say, hey, I'm an actual phone. There's an extension to LLDP, MED for media, to say I'm a phone, so therefore I want to be able to kind of connect up, put me on that voice VLAN. So there's a number of things that can kind of help there, whether it's configuration or trying to make some of that configuration happen as automatically as possible. The big thing that we would get involved with here at 7SIGNAL would be if somebody says that they did want to kind of get into the eye, that you can say, oh, that the eye is plugged into the switch. So from the eye, you can kind of say, well, what switch am I actually connected up to? Not only what switch, but what port am I plugged into? And here I'm trying to show that even on a simple network, I've just got some small switch there. that's if you're trying to look at the port numbers under there, that's underneath, and it's like, well, what exactly port is that's being plugged into? It can be kind of difficult to see that it's plugged into port 3. And by using LLDP, it's kind of easy to figure that out, and it'll show you where exactly things are at. So if you did want to kind of get into do some configuration. The big thing that I like to point out here is that while I did not put the bottle of wine there for any, nobody's paying me to put that bottle of wine there, but if 14 Hands happens to be on this phone call, and if they want to send me a shipment of wine that's for free, that to say thanks, that I'll by all means I'll take that. And let's see, it's moved on. So this is how you kind of see how that from an eye, you could kind of see from the switch. Likewise, you can kind of go on to the switch. And from the switch, you can kind of then see information about the actual eye. For instance, you can kind of then see, well, this is what port that the eye's on by, identity information kind of coming up to the switch. And then you can see more detailed information to see, oh, I could see that eye is that the IP address that it's received. And so a lot of times if people are trying to figure out where a device is at, they might say, well, I could kind of go over to the DHCP server and then figure out, well, this is the MAC address. That's one way. But sometimes people won't have access to that. A lot of times if you've got a large organization, people will end up kind of taking a look at it and saying, well, you know what, I'd have to put in a ticket request to try to get that type of information, which kind of be a pain. But typically that people would have access to the switches and so here you can kind of go off and say, oh, I could see that the device has this IP address because it's information that's being shared over LLDP. There are a number of proprietary protocols. I think probably I picked up CDP just because you hear a lot about that, and as I kind of mentioned, I used to work at Cisco, so that's one that I was familiar with. There's besides CDP, there's a lot of other different vendors, but obviously and I'll kind of get into this a little bit, that if you end up having a proprietary solution, that's that might be all well and good, and it does drive the standardization, because once people see that the benefit of it, then people say, well, shouldn't we do this in a standard way? And definitely that's the case here, that people kind of saw that, hey, we do have these proprietary methods, but if you've got a mixture of different vendors' equipment, that this type of discovery protocol wouldn't work with that. You want something that's going to work with everything. Not just just one vendor. So well, why would I say that? And so you kind of have to think about it for these link layer protocols. That's, I kind of mentioned, it's just going from one device to the next. So it's so therefore, if it was a proprietary type of solution, then it would only go from that, if it was that same vendor, to the next one. And so therefore, that if you had the diagram that I showed there, if you had the eye, that it would kind of end up seeing all the devices, because if it's a different vendor, that they wouldn't recognize that is a discovery protocol, so therefore it would just be bridged. By coming up with a standards-based approach, therefore, that if everybody implements the standard, then you could kind of, that they'll obviously all work and be able to see that, oh, the actual switch port that I'm connected to on the other side is definitely this type of device. Now, with LLDP, a lot of the implementations do kind of take into account the discovery protocols that are out there. But even there, that's if you end up getting a lot of different devices, you now start to have to kind of take a best guess as to what device is actually there. So if you are on a 7SIGNAL Eye, one of the things you kind of do is you kind of, there's a choice to say, hey, can I see all the hidden devices? And then you'll be able to see every device that it's been reporting through it. So I got through those pretty quick, and hopefully that'll kind of give you a sense of LLDP and sort of the power that it brings to you and helps you out a lot when you're going off and managing your network. Well, it's not just on the wireless side. On the wireless side, it's definitely used a lot by access points, but also it's used a lot on the infrastructure side. That's where it would have been used initially. So that I want to ask Kelsey if there are any questions there.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So encourage any of you to drop some questions here in the questions panel and we can cover it. I see a couple of good questions and comments here. So I'll start here first with a question from Anders. Are there any newer generations of LLDP and or any further developments going on with LLDP that you can elaborate on?
Yes, I know that like when I talked about the media types with the phones and so forth, that was a later version that kind of came along. I haven't been following it since then, so I'm not familiar if there's any current activity going on. But it was one of these things that, as normal, for instance, 802.11, you got all these amendments that kind of come along. And that definitely was like that with 802.1ab, where the initial work was coming out, and then people kind of say, well, you know what, we can improve this. And for instance, with the media types, it was basically a follow-on to the standard. Am I aware of any activity right now? I'm not aware of any activity, but I can be wrong on that just because I haven't been watching.
All right, thank you, Anders, and thank you, Dave. We got a question/comment here earlier on in the webinar from Pekka. And they said, question here as a heads up, I'm interested in what is the LLDP-MED? And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But Pekka says, yeah, I've seen it around, but haven't figured it out. Would be nice to know its role/use case.
Yeah, that's the media type that I was talking about. And that's where things like phones, so that's the way that things work now. If it's just the base LLDP, you can kind of see things like, oh, that's I'm doing things like this is what the IP address of that device is. So it's kind of, I can kind of see that device. And where the media helps out is kind of taking it to the next level of trying to do some type of auto configuration. And the one example that it kind of uses for the phones and to be able to put onto the correct VLAN. And you'll get certain levels of success with that based off of how you kind of deployed it and which vendors that you're using. So ideally, like you'd be able to say, oh, you know what, I don't have to, I'll minimize my configuration problems that I've introduced by leveraging LLDP media with that.
Got it. Thank you for that. Let's see what other questions we have here. We have a question here from Sean. How does LLDP interact with devices making use of 802.1 AD link aggregation?
I'm going to give you, I don't know. I think there is some interaction very similar to that, where you might be able to get some type of a benefit to it, but off the top of my head, I'm not really sure. But I'll take a look at that as well.
All right. Thank you, Dave. And I think that's all the questions that we have for today. So thank you so much for dropping those in there. And as I mentioned before, we will be posting the slides and the recording from today's presentation on our YouTube channel, on our Twitter account, and you all will be receiving a follow-up email with today's information. So if you have any other follow-up questions for Dave, feel free to send those our way and we can easily respond to you via email. So with that, thank you, Dave, for diving into this topic here today. Very interesting, and we love hearing from all of you and meeting with you every single week. So with that, we'll give you some time back on your workday calendar, and thanks for joining us. Hope to see you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.